Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Kurt Steege, Chief Technology Officer, ThunderCat Technology, and Marlon McFate, Federal Chief Technology Officer, Riverbed Technology. The cloud has caused systems to be very complex. Old solutions of network management just don't work. They just don't fit. How has Riverbed addressed this concern?
Riverbed is taking a different approach to this problem. So what we've decided to do is to start with the end user as opposed to the network. Each one of the agencies in the federal government that are moving to the cloud are finding difficulty as far as user performance goes. So we have developed a system for being able to determine the performance from the end user's perspective.
So Kurt, what's your perspective on this?
In the cloud, in the data centers, you have sort of you may have internal identity servers. They're federated with cloud servers. You're then going to have, you may have the dealing with an application that might be in yet another data center, creating information that may be stored in a database or somewhere else. You're going to have to find some way to make sure that the end user can access the information that they need when and where they want it and how they need to see it.
You know, Marlon, I think the term federated or federation is a good way to describe the current federal infrastructure because there's public cloud, private cloud, different identity services. It gets difficult to manage even one silo, never mind all of them.
Yeah, and compounding that, you end up with organizations that can, to your point, commercial versus government versus DoD, different clouds. You end up with organizations that can utilize different pieces, but not others. And each one of those comes with different restrictions as far as how you can access it. What are the access limitations? Can it talk to the public internet? Can it not? Does it need to go through some sort of TIC? Does it need to go through something like JRSS? So all of these different constraints make things within the cloud even more difficult, right? So compound what a commercial company needs to deal with as far as moving to the cloud, as far as just moving an application. Do they need to refactor? Can they lift and shift? Now, on top of that, all these other restrictions as, how do I bring my licenses? How do I bring my applications to it? Can I talk to licensing servers outside of the cloud? All of these, the BYOL ideas, those all become more and more difficult. So, and then compound on top of that the marketplaces for these oftentimes lag behind the commercial, right? So is it something that I can just spin up and pay through, say, an AWS or through a Microsoft Azure, or is it something that I need to bring my own license? And then what are those restrictions for those? We've run into those all the time. The difference between commercial and government clouds becomes a little bit more complicated than just saying it's a government cloud as opposed to a commercial cloud.
Kurt, Marlon brought up the term apps. And I wish it was just as easy as managing apps. But apps are just the starting point. I think for most federal professionals, maybe they think that's the end point, and they don't realize it's a complicated system way beyond apps.
Sure, way beyond apps, because the biggest thing, the most important thing is the information. How do you have access to the information? Mm-hmm. Can you get access to the information? Where is that data being stored? You've got requirements like DFARS, as Marlon mentioned, FedRAMP. FedRAMP clouds typically lag behind in some of these areas, and making sure that you have the right information. Is it on the right segment of the network that you need? And you're going to have to, as I said before, you've got federated identity services where you have to deal with both sides of it. And you've got portability of that information because folks are now looking at multi-cloud infrastructure. So whether it be a public-private or public-public, between different cloud providers.
Marlon, I've known you for a while here, and you've got a good, deep experience in the federal government with information technology. Years ago, if you asked someone, where's the data stored, you'd go down the hall. But today, if you went up to a federal IT professional and asked, where's the data stored, you'd have to get a pen and paper and write down, well, there's the cloud, data centers, virtualized systems, mobile devices, software as a service. I mean, what's the right answer? Where's the data stored?
Yeah, and this goes back to conversations we've had in the past as far as the complexity of networks, the complexity of data, and where it is. I've always said that, unfortunately, a lot of times when it comes to technology adoption, the government is sometimes on the backside of the adoption curve. But I see them coming, forward quite a bit more. Things in the past that we thought were never going to be really there, like tons and tons of mobile devices, wireless networks, and such. They're definitely coming to the front of that adoption curve, which again only causes the problem that we see within the commercial side of things, which is the complexity becomes much greater. Therefore, networks and applications become more fragile. So again, in that you end up having a need for visibility. I was actually talking to a government customer yesterday that basically, admitted to the fact that they had absolutely no visibility into their applications, their network, what was on their network, all of those things. So how are you going to move into this much more complex world without knowing exactly what's on your network? I mean, even from a cybersecurity perspective, this becomes a huge, huge problem.
So Kurt, you're sitting at a trouble desk and here someone calls you and says, my system's really slow, and you have no visibility into the network. What do? Do you run out of the building? I mean, this is a challenge.
Well, I wouldn't say you have no visibility in the network. I think what's, and what we're here talking about a bit today is the fact that in the past, most of your visibility was very machine-centric. It was based on the network, based on the servers. Like, yeah, my servers are running, my network is running, it's running at this speed, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff was there for quite some time. The question right now is, from the user's perspective, they don't care that the servers are running in the back end. They care that they can't get to their information, or they can't see their information, or they're having some sort of issue. Yeah. And I think that's where we come into the Eternity project.
Absolutely, and what you just described is exactly what we've basically been going through for the last couple of decades, right? And we call them point solutions, and the joke is, it's like I'm pointing at you. It's your problem. It's not my problem. My network is great. My application is great, right? And so it's really just finger pointing, or what groups have gone to is what is my mean time to innocence? Basically, when can I say it's not my problem? And what we found was the network team says everything is green, right? Because what are they looking at? They're looking at it's up, it's down. They're not actually looking at a performance perspective. Application team, same thing. The application team is saying my application is working correctly. It's up, right? You can get to my application. But they're not looking at it from a performance perspective. And then in the end, what your troubleshooter has is they're still talking to a customer on the phone, which, if we're all being honest, that's the most important person, right? If it's in the DoD, that's an operator out in the field. It might be someone at DHS, trying to work through a customs issue or something along those lines. That is the most important person. So everyone else is saying it's great. That person is saying that they're having difficulty. That's the most important person. So why haven't we been looking at this problem from their perspective?
Okay, Marlon, I've got a 30-second challenge for you. You just dropped in that term eternity. Maybe give us a little nutshell description of what eternity means for our federal audience.
Oh, okay. So eternity, you said 30 seconds, huh? All right. Difficult for me. Eternity is a new product that Riverbed has, and it focuses on the performance of an application, the performance of a network, performance of a machine from the end user's perspective. So, if you were a troubleshooter in the past and somebody called up and said, I have a problem with this particular application, you would ask them to do things, maybe you take some packet captures, you look at the network. This actually allows you to say definitively and quantitatively, yes, they are having a problem with that application. 2, it is not the norm as far as the performance experience that they're having. We take every single, we call it click to render, and that means, from I check an email, exactly how long does that entire process take for that particular end user, quantifying both the system, the network, the server, and then all the way back, and say, yes, this particular person is having a performance problem, and then being able to identify and drill down from there.
That's perfect. It almost sounds like their frame retail is all about detail, and this gives you the detail to understand your problem.
Absolutely.
I'm your moderator, John Gilroy, and you're listening to the discussion, The End User Revolt and How to Improve It, sponsored by ThunderCat Technology and Riverbed Technology on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.